Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we are going to talk about widowhood today and rediscovering yourself. And we've got some fantastic women that are going to be on today because I am, as of a year and a half, a newly bereaved widow. So I'm expecting to get a lot of good advice from these ladies. So we have a fabulous friend of ours on, Neff Hernandez, who runs the great Soaring Spirits Foundation that we've been connected with for many years, and they've been helpful for me, and Michelle's a fabulous person. So I want to introduce her, and then you can introduce our two wonderful guests.
Okay, great, Mom. So as you said, we'll be talking about widowhood, rediscovering yourself. And our guest is someone that has done phenomenal things for widows and widowers all over the world. And her name is Neff Hernandez. Michelle is the founder and chief executive officer of Soaring Spirits International, a nonprofit organization providing peer support and programming for widowed people worldwide. Michelle started Soaring Spirits after she lost her husband, Philip, in a tragic bike accident. This community of support reaches millions today. Michelle is the author of the soon-to-be-released book, Different After You, Rediscovering Yourself After Grief or Trauma. She has received numerous awards, including a letter of recognition from President Joe Biden, the 2021 CNN Hero Award, and many, many other awards. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here.
It's great to have you on.
I'm happy to see your faces in person too.
Yeah, it is good after COVID. Yes, yes. So, do you want to introduce?
Yeah, let me introduce the other guests first. Sade Ariyo. Sade was widowed suddenly 10 years ago. She is a wellness coach and podcaster. She has been building community in her local area as regional social group leader for Soaring Spirits since 2013. She is coming to us virtually from Denver, Colorado today. Her passions for people, connections, community, music, and fun come together in her life and work. Becoming a widow definitely threw her off balance for a while, but she believes there is room for joy in her life no matter what. Welcome to the show, Sade.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sade, for being on. It's great to have you.
Good to have you here. And coming also virtually from Southern California is Priscilla Schubert. Priscilla was richly blessed and married to her kind and gentle husband, Joel, who was her best friend for nearly 37 years. She is the mom to 3 wonderful grown daughters, 1 son-in-law, and a precious granddaughter. She is a breast cancer survivor, diagnosed just 1 year after her husband passed away from male breast cancer. She has been a regional group leader for Soaring Spirits since 2014. Welcome to the show, Priscilla.
Thank you so much.
It's great to have you both on, and one of the things that I was thinking about is the fact, and I think this is correct in looking at your bios, that one of you, Sade, your husband died suddenly?
Yeah.
And Priscilla, your husband died of breast cancer, so over a longer. So
Yes.
we've got both perspectives, and I love that. Mm-hmm. I think it's important. How did your husband die, Sade?
So my husband was out riding his bike, and he collapsed and had a heart attack. We both left the house together, and we're like, just go for a quick run. And so I ran back home. On the way home, found him with all the commotion and everything. Yeah, there was no indication of anything to come, so it totally threw me off. Yeah.
So two different perspectives. My husband died of a staph infection after a back surgery. So he'd had many back surgeries, but it was still sudden. So those two perspectives are interesting. For the people that are listening, have you thought about the difference between sudden death and knowing that, or dealing with a long-term illness?
I have. I'll speak into that. When people come to our group, a lot of times people will ask that question. You know, which do you think is worse, losing your spouse suddenly or losing them over a long illness? And I always say, there's no better and there's no worse. It's all loss. And it doesn't, the griefs are different, I feel, because in one case, you perhaps most likely didn't really get to say goodbye, and what a deep grief that is. And in the other case, you had to watch the person you loved most suffer. And so I think they both hold their own uniquenesses, but at the end of the day, your person is gone, and that's the bottom line of the deep grief.
I agree with that, Priscilla. There's no easy way to lose somebody.
No.
At the end of the day, they're not here.
That's right.
Right, and I will add to that, like even when you have similar losses, the grief journey is still unique, right? So, you know, and people ask me like, well, you know, it's now or sudden or long term, it all sucks is what I say. Like, all of it.
I like that, Sade.
Yeah.
That's true.
So Michelle, you've been running Soaring Spirits for a long time, and these are some of your regional leaders, right?
Yes.
And I wondered what's your take on that question of your husband died suddenly in an automobile or car, a bike
Right, yeah.
accident. Yeah.
So I always tell everyone, whatever day your person died, that's their worst day. And so it doesn't matter how you got there, though I agree with what Priscilla said, which is they're just a different type of grief. And so, and I recently lost my dad. He died with a long-term illness, and experiencing that firsthand really just highlighted it is very different. It's a different experience. I know our caregivers find themselves wondering, who am I now? I used to have this big job, and the job was to make sure that my person was the best cared for they could be. And now over just, a few minutes, now suddenly the big job that I had is no longer. And so they have that whole world to navigate. And a sudden loss has the world to navigate, where just yesterday, my life was totally normal, and today my life is completely upside down, and I had no warning. And so each path has its own unique differences, but what Soaring Spirits does is enters people's lives when they have already come to that day where they've woken up, and it's like, what do I do with myself now? How am I supposed to build something from the rubble that's around me, however the rubble arrived, whether it was suddenly or over time? And so we see that, those connections are important to people who have a similar type of loss, but also can be equally important around other areas, such as, the way you look at the world, or whether or not you have children, or if you thought you were going to have children but didn't get a chance. So whether or not you had the same death experience, there are so many things that bring people together.
Well, and I'm thinking, regardless of how someone died, you're still asking, who am I without this person in my life?
Absolutely. And I could see these two nodding over here out of the corner of my eye.
Sade, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, that was a huge question. I think when you lose your spouse young as well, it's oh my gosh, my whole life is ahead of me. And the way I've identified for the longest time is as a wife and a mother of my kids. And then boom, one day, that's not the case anymore. And so I think, at least for me, it took a minute. I think it takes a while for the brain to even register the fact that the person isn't there anymore. And so for me, for example, my kids and I would go out to dinner, and I would ask for a table for 4 because, and there's 3 of us, and my kids are like, no, it's only 3 of us. So there's the contending with, this person is not actually here. And then you get to the, well, who am I now? Like what path is my life going to go, when I thought for sure we were going to grow old together. And so a lot of that involved rebuilding. For me, going to Camp Widow my first year, and I say this all the time, the very first time I went to Camp Widow was what actually triggered me thinking about the possibility of rebuilding. Because
how did you get there? I have to ask you, how did you know about it? And Camp Widow is Michelle's program for a Soaring Spirits Foundation. How did you know about it?
So my kids and I went to a grief support group. So a little bit of backtrack. We had just moved to Denver, and it was barely a year here when my husband died. So we had no family, no support or anything. So I took my kids to a grief support place in Denver called Judy's House, and they support kids who've lost a parent or significant person in their life. And one of the moms in my group just came back from Camp Widow when it was still in South Carolina, Michelle. So Myrtle Beach, and she brought the flyer, and I said, "Oh, I'm going." And my kids were going to be going for a camp that weekend, and I was anxious about staying home by myself. I'm like, perfect. I don't know what's going to happen in Camp Widow, but I'm going to go. And Michelle was the first person I saw. Honestly, from the moment I met Michelle, it was, yes, this is where I needed to be. And honestly, I left camp that weekend really with the feeling of, I don't know what my life is going to look like, but I'm going to be okay. And you know, that's why I've been a regional leader since 2013. That's why I cheerlead this organization as much as I can. So yeah, but that was the very beginning for me, and that was like after my first year. So like I went from waking up every morning and saying, "Oh, SHIT, I'm still here," to, "Oh my gosh, I can still, you know, I can miss my husband and be sad that he's gone, but still live a life that is fulfilling."
Yeah.
And that concept did not even cross my mind before I went to camp.
Well, I want to hear your comments about Priscilla also, but I want to get back after we hear Priscilla and talk about loneliness, because that's the word you just brought up that we hear a lot. So Priscilla, tell us how you got involved and what did you do the first step out, and how long was it? And
yeah. Well, I was so lost when my husband passed away. Even though I thought I was prepared, I was not prepared. So I was desperate I didn't know any widows. I didn't know where to turn. So I got online and I was researching, and I went to the bookstore and got books. And I was just desperate for someone to say to me, you know, "You're going to make it through this. Like, you can survive this." Because I'd get up in the morning and go, "Okay, one more day. I'm not sure if I'm going to." So I actually found Soaring Spirits and was resourcing some of the blogs and posts and things like that, and found it really kind of lifting. But when I went to Camp Widow, I'll never forget it was a very impacting moment. Michelle was giving her keynote, and she said, and this was, I think I was 2 years out. And she said, "Some of you out there, if I were to ask you how you are doing, you'd say, 'I'm okay.'" And I thought, yeah, that's me. You know, it's like, I've made it 2 years. I miss him desperately, but I'm getting up every day and I'm okay. And she said, "And some of you think that's the best it's ever going to be." And I was like, yeah, I think that's the best it's ever going to be. If I'm okay, that's pretty good. And she said, "I'm here to tell you that one day I would love to ask you that question, and you're going to be able to say, 'I'm good. I'm good.' Not that I don't still miss him desperately, but I'm good. I've made a life." And I remember her saying, and I just thought, oh man, I don't know whether that's true or not, but I remember her saying, "If you don't have hope for that, you can borrow some of my hope." And I did. A couple of years later, I went to her and said, "You were right," you know. And I think for me, the identity piece was the shocker. Just entirely, like I got married when I was just 20, and it was like, I don't remember life, just Priscilla. And so that was a real challenge to find a way. And for me, starting the regional group was the key, because I remember saying to my counselor the first couple of years, "This grief is so heavy, it's so much, that if something good doesn't come out of this, I don't know whether I'm going to make it. Because, you know, if some beauty doesn't come from these ashes, it's just too much. If it's just grief for grief's sake." And when I started the regional group, when I had the privilege to start it just brought meaning and purpose into my life. It was like, okay, I went through that, so now I can sit with others who are walking that same road, and I can be a place of understanding and care. And that redeemed my grief, and it made it so, okay, so there's a reason, there's something good that came from it. I wouldn't wish it, but you know, from that grief place, from that pain, came something beautiful. And it's
Now,
such a
tell
joy
me,
to-
how long was it before you started the group?
It was 4 years.
Okay, I just want to say that because to people who are watching the show, many are newly bereaved. You give such a hope to the future for them. But what about the loneliness and, how did you deal with that early on? And Michelle, you've written a new book, so what's your thought on that early year loneliness? And I know I went to Camp Widow, and one of the things you said was when the person died, you started a new life.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part. People often will say, they think that the death of your person is the worst day. I'm like, for me, it was after that. It was the day after when I was like, okay, now what am I supposed to do with myself? And having to rediscover who you are and learn to integrate the death of your person, your grief experience, into who you're becoming, so that it's not a matter of walking away from what was, it's a matter of finding a way to make it a part of who you are. So that as you move forward, you're carrying everything with you, all of your experiences, and taking that whole experience with you instead of trying to leave it behind. Because I think the challenge for widowed people in particular, especially because we're becoming a new person, and so unless you allow yourself to become a new person, you're trying to get back to the person you were before. And we set ourselves up for failure when we do that, because it's impossible to be that person. That person lived a different life. And so once you're beginning this new life, it doesn't mean that doesn't all come with you, but if we try to walk away from it, and it's almost like, running from something that keeps chasing you, and until you stop and be able to say, okay, this did happen to me. This is a part of my life. That person is a part of my life. That's when you get the opportunity to begin to ask, okay, so now what? And that question, I think, is the pivotal question. Now
Who
what?
am I without my spouse, right, Heidi?
Absolutely. I'm thinking you're starting your next chapter, but when you're in the waiting room, trying to figure out what is the next chapter, like you said, that's a difficult place to be.
It is.
It's like, and at the end of the day, the only thing you want back is your person. And you can't have what you want most. So how do we reinvent? But I like what you said. How do we start the next chapter and bring our person with us in a new and different way also?
I think as long as we also set the goal to be allowing that person to come with. Because so often we set the goal as, I want to either get back to the person I was or just walk away from this, because it's awful, it's hard. But if we can't do either of those things, they're both impossible. And so we set ourselves up for failure, and then we end up in situations where we feel like we failed because we can't become the person we used to be, and we aren't somebody new yet that can get away from all of this sadness. We have to bring it all in order to be able to be a new person, because that's a part of the history of this new person. And so I really encourage widowed people, because it's also, when you want nothing but what was, it's really hard to turn your face to the future. And so it's okay if all you want is what was. What you have to remember, though, is that you can't rebuild the exact same life. It's not possible. And so sit with whatever you need. We need the time to grieve what was. But when it's time to start building, you have to remember you're building something different. You are not building the same thing.
That's good advice. That's important.
So let me ask you guys, what would you suggest to somebody who's newly bereaved? And Sade, what would you suggest to somebody who's newly bereaved, widow?
So I allow yourself the time to grieve. And I know this is really hard to do, but to be present with what is. It's so easy, especially, it's so easy to spin forward to all of this craziness and not remember that, wait a minute, I'm here right now and my heart hurts. And to allow it to happen, and then the other piece is, I think in my early days of grief, I thought this gut-wrenching, awful pain was going to be there forever. And to know that that's not the case, to be gentle with yourself, to be as kind as possible.
Yeah.
Because I should do this, I should do that. I be as kind and gentle, like whatever it is that you're waiting for or that has to be done will get done. So I just say a whole lot of compassion, a whole lot of patience, stay present, and, you know, lean into the people who, I think one of the biggest things for me, and, you know, what your community shows up and looks like in the midst of your grief is completely different to what you would ever think.
That's right.
I was in a place where I really knew nobody, and a whole community rose up. I mean, strangers picked my kids up and brought them to the hospital on that day. Like, I had no idea. Somebody started a food train that I did not know. You know, people were bringing all kinds of things. So be open to the help that's available to you, and know that it might not come from the people that you believe are the ones. So, yeah. But first and foremost, just breathe, be present, be kind. Be kind.
Very nice. How about Priscilla? How about you? What would be your advice?
Many of the things that Sade said resonate with me. I think being gentle with yourself and not responding to all the things in your mind that tell you what you should be doing. I think that, you know, that is a kind of a downward spiral. I should be doing this. I should be better. I should be feeling fine. I should be able to go to this gathering. And just allow yourself space and time to grieve well, because I think sometimes we feel a lot of pressure from people who care about us, who love us, but want us to be okay. And so we kind of push through and don't allow ourselves the time to actually sit with our sadness, and being kind and gentle. I love that. I think the other thing that I would comment on, because of what Sade said about it not always feeling the way it feels now. I mean, I hesitate sometimes to say that, because I don't want people to feel like I'm under, like, I don't know, that I'm not acknowledging how deeply they feel what they're feeling now, and to be in it. I finally came up with an analogy for me that helped me describe my journey from that deep, devastating pain to, and this is what it is, I'll just share it. I felt like when Joel first died, I had this gaping hole, and it was a mess, and it was oozing and bleeding, and it was just terrible. And as time went on, what happened was the hole is still there, like that empty place that no one else can fill is still there, but the edges are healed. It's no longer this, you know, open wound. It's now a space where I remember him, where I treasure him, but it's not the same gut-wrenching pain that it is in those early days. So to have hope for that and hold on to that, I think is important.
Great, thank you. Michelle, do you have some advice for the newly
I feel
bereaved?
like these ladies have done such a great job. What I tell people always, the first thing I say to them is treat yourself as kindly as you would treat your best friend.
I love it.
If your best friend were living your exact same experience, treat yourself like you would treat them. And if you can do that, that's a really good start.
Now tell us about your region. Tell us about your programs at Soaring Spirits.
You can find all the programs for Soaring Spirits at soaringspirits.org. We have in-person and virtual programming available. One of the things that we started in 2021, actually in 2020, was our newly widowed program. And so for any of the newly bereaved widowed people out there. We have a call every Tuesday. It is recorded, so if it's not a right time for you, it's an opportunity for you to be able to have access to both resources and also just to see some faces of other people and know that you're not the only widowed person. I remember feeling like I was the only widowed person in the world. I knew for sure that I wasn't, but I didn't know how to find the others. And so at Soaring Spirits, you will be able to find others.
And how do you find Soaring Spirits?
You can find us online at soaringspirits.org.
And how about your new book? Tell us what that is
Thank
again.
you. Yes, I'm very excited. It's called Different After You, as you said. It's coming out in February. It's available for pre-order now. And the whole premise is to help you discover who you are after a life-changing experience like widowhood or even another trauma has changed you and you don't quite know how to become another person.
I love that, Different After You.
Me too.
So Heidi, what have you got thoughts on this? And
I like Michelle's book because I mean I'm a bereaved sibling and I also lost my dad, and it sounds like a book that I would get something out of too, because much as you all have said about who am I without my person, I definitely said that when my brother died and then again when my father died. I mean, death never gets easier, and so I think that it is, and that identity piece happens whenever someone that we're close to dies.
Yeah, I agree. I always tell people for the book, you, we all get to define what the you is. Different After You was intended to allow people to shift with every new experience, whether it's a death experience or a different type of trauma, because we continue to reinvent ourselves each and every time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the things for me, and I don't think it's always easy for people who like to give to other people to ask for help.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so I'll say that telling people how you really feel, family members or whatever, and then asking them to help you and saying, my day is not working for me. And also you were kind of mentioning something that is interesting. You make new friends. That people come out that there are people who are good grief support, let's put it that way. So I'm hoping, I know Soaring Spirits is great grief support, and we're support there for people at Open to Hope, all sorts of loss. So, and you guys are there doing your grief groups, and you can go online and find out if there's a group in your area,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep. Under our in-person
Or
programming.
you can start a group if there is a
Or you
That's
can
right.
start a group. Good
I love that.
Good job.
When you're ready, you can start a group in your area.
Yep.
Listen,
Yep.
thank you guys so much for being on the show today. You've been absolutely
you.
terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for helping so many out there who have had spouse loss, and you are truly an example of the fact that you can not only survive, but you can thrive after loss.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, and thank you for being on the show today, Michelle.
It's a
Thank you.
joy to be with
Honor.
you too.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Michelle, for everything you're doing all over the world to help people to find hope after loss. You are talking the talk and you are walking the walk.
And thanks
thank you.
everybody for joining us on this show today. And Heidi and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.